Leave the old-timer alone. He is not bothering anyone. The man's voice cut through the diner's chatter, calm but firm. He stepped between the sneering teenagers and the elderly veteran nursing his coffee. One of the teens scoffed, "Mind your own business, pal." The man did not flinch, just held their gaze until they backed down. An hour later, screeching tires and flashing lights shattered the midday calm as black SUVs sealed off the entire block. Why? Comment. Stand up if you believe defending others is always the right call. Mark Turner looked like any other regular at Rosie's Diner. Mid-40s, maybe early 50s, lines of tiredness around his eyes, dressed in unassuming jeans and a flannel shirt over a plain t-shirt. He sat at the counter, nursing lukewarm coffee, staring out the window at the slow Tuesday traffic. He blended into the background, just another face in the worn vinyl booths and Formica tabletops. He came here most days for lunch, enjoying the anonymity, the brief escape from whatever it was he escaped from. No one asked questions at Rosie's. Across the diner, huddled in a corner booth, sat Earl Johnson. Earl was pushing 80, thin and frail, wearing clothes that were clean but dated, slacks a size too big, a faded windbreaker despite the warmth inside, and a slightly askew VFW cap perched on his white hair. He nursed a single cup of coffee, making it last, occasionally murmuring to himself or staring blankly at the sugar dispenser. He was a fixture, mostly ignored, sometimes the subject of pitying glances or hushed comments about letting himself go. He never bothered anyone, paid for his coffee, and kept to himself, lost in memories only he could access. Today, however, he had drawn the wrong kind of attention. A group of 3 high school kids, loud and boisterous, had slid into the booth opposite Earl. They were skipping school, fueled by cheap bravado and sodas. At first they ignored the old man, too engrossed in their phones and crude jokes. But then one of them, the apparent ringleader with an obnoxious laugh, noticed Earl muttering, "Yo, check out Grandpa talking to the salt shaker." He snickered loud enough for half the diner to hear. His friends erupted in laughter. Earl looked up, startled, confusion clouding his pale blue eyes. "Just remembering," he mumbled, shrinking slightly in his seat. "Remembering what, old man?" Another teen chimed in, leaning across the table mockingly. How good the food was back in the dinosaur age. "Leave him be," Rosie called from behind the counter, wiping her hands on her apron. But her voice lacked real force, and the teens ignored her. The ringleader spotted the VFW cap. "Oh, a war hero. Huh, bet you were a real tough guy." He flicked the brim of Earl's cap. "What war was that, Pops?" "The War of 1812. Earl flinched, pulling his head back. "Korea," he said softly, his voice barely a whisper. "I was there." "Korea?" The teen feigned amazement. "Wow. Did you invent kimchi or something?" His friends howled again. Other patrons shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact, wishing the kids would leave, but unwilling to intervene. A businessman in a nearby booth sighed loudly and pointedly looked at his watch. Mark at the counter had been watching the exchange, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. He had seen bullies like this before, in schoolyards and far more dangerous places. He hated needless cruelty, the casual infliction of pain on the vulnerable. He drained his coffee cup, slid off the stool, and walked calmly towards the corner booth. Mark stopped beside the teenager's booth, his presence unassuming, but suddenly drawing their attention. He was not large or physically imposing, but something in his quiet stance made them pause their taunts. "Leave the old-timer alone," Mark said again, his voice still calm, level. "He is not bothering anyone." The ringleader looked Mark up and down, assessing him. Saw the average build, the plain clothes, the lack of overt threat. His confidence returned. "Who are you?" "His bodyguard. Mind your own business, pal. We are just having some fun." "Your fun is disrespectful," Mark stated simply. "This man served his country. That deserves better than your cheap jokes." He did not raise his voice, did not make threats. He just stood there, a calm obstacle. Served his country, the teen scoffed, emboldened by his friend's snickers. "Yeah, maybe peeling potatoes." "Look at him." He gestured dismissively at Earl, who had sunk lower in his seat, his face pale. "Apologize to him," Mark said, his voice hardening slightly, a glint appearing in his previously weary eyes. "What?" The teen could not believe it. "Apologize to him. You are kidding, right?" "No," Mark replied. "You were disrespectful. Apologize." The standoff stretched for a tense moment. The diner had gone quiet, all eyes on the confrontation. The teens looked at each other, suddenly, less sure of themselves. Mark had not moved, had not threatened, but his unwavering gaze and the quiet certainty in his voice were unnerving. The ringleader finally broke, pushing himself out of the booth aggressively. "Whatever, man. This place sucks anyway." He shoved past Mark, bumping his shoulder intentionally. "Let us bounce." His friends scrambled out after him, casting nervous glances back at Mark before swaggering out the door, their earlier bravado deflated. Mark watched them go, his expression unreadable. He then turned to Earl. The tension in the diner slowly dissipated as conversation resumed, though many patrons continued to steal glances at Mark and Earl. Mark slid into the booth opposite the elderly veteran. "You all right, Earl?" he asked quietly. Earl looked up, his eyes still clouded, but showing a flicker of gratitude. They were just kids," he stammered. "Did not mean nothing." "Does not make it right," Mark replied gently. He signaled Rosie for another coffee for Earl and a refill for himself. Sometimes people forget basic respect. Rosie brought the coffees, giving Mark an appreciative nod. "Thanks for stepping in, Mark. Those kids are trouble." Mark just shrugged slightly. Everyone deserves a quiet cup of coffee. He and Earl sat in silence for a while, the shared warmth of the mugs a small comfort. Earl seemed to relax slightly, the hunted look fading from his eyes. He took a slow sip of the fresh coffee. "Korea," Earl murmured again, seemingly to himself. "Coldest winter I ever knew." Mark nodded slowly. "I hear that." He did not press Earl for details, did not ask about his service. He simply sat with him, offering a quiet presence, a silent acknowledgement. After another 10 minutes, Earl carefully fished some crumpled bills from his pocket and laid them on the table. More than enough for his coffee. "Thank you, son," he said, his voice stronger now. He gave Mark a shaky nod and slowly made his way out of the diner, pulling his VFW cap firmly onto his head. Mark watched him go, a thoughtful expression on his face. He finished his own coffee, paid his bill, left Rosie a generous tip, and headed out into the afternoon sun, blending back into the anonymous flow of the city sidewalk. He walked a block down, checking his watch, a subtle shift in his demeanor, suggesting his quiet interlude was over. He paused near a nondescript sedan parked mid-block, leaning against it as if waiting for someone, his gaze scanning the street with a practiced, unobtrusive alertness that would have gone unnoticed by the average passerby. Exactly 1 hour after the confrontation in the diner, the ordinary Tuesday afternoon ruptured. The first black SUV, windows tinted to impenetrable darkness, turned the corner sharply, its tires squealing slightly as it braked, blocking the intersection nearest Rosie's diner. Before anyone could fully register what was happening, 2 more identical SUVs roared up, boxing in the entire block from the other end. Doors opened simultaneously, and men in dark suits and earpieces emerged, moving with crisp, coordinated efficiency. They directed traffic away, gesturing firmly at confused drivers, their faces impassive, but their posture radiating authority. Within 90 seconds, the block containing Rosie's diner was sealed off. Pedestrians stopped, staring, pulling out phones to record the sudden, unexplained lockdown. Whispers rippled through the onlookers. Was it a bust, a VIP visit, terrorism drill? Rosie and her few remaining customers pressed against the diner windows, watching with wide eyes. The men in suits formed a loose perimeter, communicating quietly into their wrists. The air crackled with tension and unanswered questions. Then one of the rear doors of the central SUV opened. A uniformed military officer stepped out, his boots hitting the pavement with authority. He was not just any officer. The insignia on his shoulders denoted high rank, a brigadier general. He adjusted his perfectly aligned service cap, his eyes sharp and intelligent. Quickly assessing the scene, he conferred briefly with one of the suited men, then turned his gaze towards the spot down the block where Mark Turner was still leaning against the sedan, seemingly unfazed by the commotion unfolding around him. The general began walking purposefully towards Mark, ignoring the stares and murmurs of the bewildered onlookers. The lockdown was not random. It had a target, and that target was the unassuming man in the flannel shirt who had defended an old veteran over coffee. The general approached Mark, his stride measured, his expression serious, but showing a hint of familiarity, perhaps even relief. The suited agents maintained their positions, creating a bubble of controlled space around the two men. Onlookers strained to hear, phones held high, but the conversation was kept low, private amidst the public spectacle. "Commander Turner," the general said, his voice pitched just for Mark, though he kept his posture formal. "Took us an hour to reroute and secure the approach after your signal. Everything all right? Your check-in was overdue." Mark pushed himself off the sedan, his earlier casualness replaced by a quiet alertness. "Minor delay, General Kirby. Unforeseen civilian interaction." He nodded, briefly back towards the direction of the diner. "Had to handle a situation." General Kirby's eyes narrowed slightly. "A situation? Your orders were strict observation. Zero engagement. Was the asset compromised?" "Negative, General," Mark replied. "The asset was not involved. Just a personal matter. Some kids hassling an old vet. I intervened." The general absorbed this, his gaze flickering momentarily towards the diner, then back to Mark, a complex mix of disapproval and understanding in his eyes. "Personal matters are a luxury this assignment does not afford, Commander. You know that." "I do, sir," Mark acknowledged. "But some lines should not be crossed regardless of the mission parameters." It was handled quietly. Quietly. General Kirby raised an eyebrow, gesturing subtly at the black SUVs, the blocked street, the surrounding agents, and the growing crowd. "This is your definition of quiet, Turner." Mark allowed a small wry smile. "The intervention was quiet, sir. The XFIL protocols perhaps less so, but necessary given the sensitive nature of the primary objective nearby." He straightened up fully, shedding the last vestiges of the unassuming diner patron. The weariness in his eyes was replaced by sharp focus, the posture of a man accustomed to command and consequence. "The package is secure," he added, indicating the sedan ready for transport. General Kirby nodded, the brief flicker of personal concern replaced by professional focus. "All right, Commander, let us move." He turned to one of the agents. "Stage 2 protocols. Escort Commander Turner and the package to the designated transfer point." As the agents opened the rear door of the sedan for Mark, Rosie and a few brave customers edged out of the diner, keeping a respectful distance, but unable to contain their curiosity. Rosie recognized Mark immediately. "Mark, what in the world is going on?" she called out, bewildered. General Kirby paused, turning slightly towards the diner owner. Mark gave a subtle shake of his head, but the general chose to respond, perhaps sensing an opportunity for a teachable moment, or simply to acknowledge the woman who ran the place where his commander had intervened. "Ma'am," General Kirby addressed Rosie, his voice polite, but carrying the weight of his rank. "Mr. Turner here was concluding some sensitive government business." He glanced back at Mark. "Apparently, he was also ensuring that basic decencies were upheld in your establishment earlier." Rosie's eyes widened as she connected the dots, the quiet man at her counter, the confrontation with the teens, and now this overwhelming display of official power. The businessman who had sighed impatiently earlier was among the onlookers, his face pale with realization. "He works for you?" Rosie asked the general, gesturing towards Mark. General Kirby offered a thin smile. "Commander Turner does not work for me, ma'am. He operates at a level where men like me ensure his operational environment is secure." He let that sink in. He took time out from a critical national security matter to defend an elderly citizen from harassment. That tells you something about his character. He looked pointedly at the crowd. Perhaps it is a character more people should emulate. Mark gave a brief, almost imperceptible nod towards Rosie, a silent acknowledgement before sliding into the waiting SUV. The general followed him into the vehicle, the doors shut with solid finality. Within moments, the convoy moved out, disappearing as quickly and efficiently as it had arrived. The agents melted away, the barricades vanished, and traffic began to flow again, leaving behind a block full of stunned witnesses and the lingering echo of authority. The block returned to a semblance of normalcy, but the atmosphere was irrevocably changed. Whispers replaced the earlier silence. People clustered in small groups discussing what they had witnessed. Who was Mark? Commander Turner. What kind of sensitive government business shuts down a city block? Rosie stood stunned by her diner, replaying the morning's events in her head. Mark's calm intervention, the general's words, the revelation of hidden importance behind the unassuming man she served coffee to almost daily. The businessman, who had been annoyed by the earlier commotion, quietly paid his bill and left, avoiding eye contact. The story buzzed through the neighborhood. The teenagers who had harassed Earl heard about the black SUVs and the general inquiring about the incident at the diner. Fear replaced their earlier bravado. They avoided Rosie's for weeks. Earl Johnson, oblivious to the highly drama his brief moment of distress had indirectly triggered, was likely back in his small room, perhaps sipping tea, lost in his own quiet memories of service. Mark Turner, or Commander Turner, was gone, heading towards a transfer point, a secure facility, or perhaps another anonymous coffee shop in another city, resuming his watch. His brief defense of Earl was not part of any mission, yet it spoke volumes. It was a reminder that duty does not always wear a uniform, and courage does not always require a battlefield. Sometimes it is just about standing up for someone else in a quiet diner, regardless of who you are or what secrets you carry. The incident served as a stark reminder for those who witnessed it. You never truly understand the story behind the face across the counter. Respect is not reserved for rank or titles revealed. It is owed naturally, especially to those who have already paid their dues, like Earl, and to those who rise for decency, like the quiet commander who paused his crucial work to intervene. Because real strength is not just about classified missions and strategic roles. It is about the integrity revealed when you think no one important is watching. Remember that the quiet ones often carry the deepest burdens and the greatest strengths. Subscribe to my channel if you believe in ordinary heroes and the power of standing up for what is right, no matter the